After Jude talks about the obstinance and disobedience and rebellion, even of the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, then he uses the example of Sodom and Gomorrah and their sexual immorality and perversion, and how this brought God's judgment and the destruction of those two cities and the villages around them. And in verse 8, we've been chewing on this for a few times. In the very same way, on the strength of their dreams, these ungodly people, these ungodly people are the ones who slipped in among the believers in the church that Jude was writing to. And he's, it's a short book. Do yourself a favor and go back and start reading at verse 1. But anyway, these ungodly people pollute their own bodies. Now, in the same way, he's talking about, this is a direct point back to Sodom and Gomorrah, their sexual immorality, their perversion. There's a lot of different versions of this perversion, this sexual immorality. Here's probably the central point, in my opinion, is when you step outside of God's plan, you lose the benefit of his plan and you begin to reap what you've sown in terms of disobedience. That's a soft way of saying, hey, the context for sexual conduct is marriage. There is no other context for it. And God doesn't stutter about this in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. He makes it plain and clear. Okay. They pollute their own bodies, and this, as I said, could mean a lot. There's a lot of ways to pollute your body. One is through sexual immorality. One is through abuse of alcohol, other substances. And then he goes on and says they reject authority. It's not like they resent authority. They reject authority. This is not them saying, you shouldn't, I don't like it that you're in authority. I don't like how you do X, Y, and Z. I don't like the laws you make. That's not rejecting them. Rejecting them is, hey, up yours. I'm sorry. That's a very unpastoral thing to say, but that's kind of what these people and people who today are living in this way say to authority. They reject it. 3-year-olds say it this way: you're not the boss of me, right? This is huge in our culture. Our culture, in the last 15 or 20 years, we've reached a tipping point where it's no longer about, you have every right to complain about things that you don't like. To today, you can reject it. It doesn't apply to you because it's you've deemed it as wrong for you. I can go on, but I'll get real political, and nobody needs that. So they reject authority. And here's the last thing. This is a mystery to me. Okay, I'll just read it and then we'll think about it. They reject authority and heap abuse on celestial beings. That's weird. How do you heap abuse on celestial beings? Wow. Okay, let's step back in time and think about in the first century and midway through the first century, just a little more than midway through the first century, Jude writes this to people who have, we don't there's not an indication that this is to Jewish Christians. This is just to Christians, and probably the majority of them were Gentiles. Here's the second thing. The majority of these people either were or had been slaves. A third of the population of the Roman Empire were slaves. Now, there's different kinds of slaves and different amounts of freedom and latitude in their lives. But anyway, and one of the primary characteristics of the first century religiously in the Roman Empire was superstition. See, Roman religion, which we today would call mythology, Zeus and Jupiter and Aphrodite and just the whole pantheon of Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, was I'm going to sound judgmental toward all these people, but this was just a very mythologized and superstitious approach to explaining things that they couldn't explain in any other way. Why did they have crops sometimes, and why did the soil not yield them at others? Why were some people able to succeed and others not? So they created a system. It became a religious system. I think, I'm not an anthropologist, so my theories are not very well founded. They're just from my own thought. But it seems to me that this began as a way to explain the unexplainable, and it became a religious observance. So, knowing that about the culture that Jude was working with and writing to, there was still the world around them would have been full of superstitious religious belief and activity. This idea of heaping abuse on celestial beings might have been out of that within that context. It might have come out from there. So let's think about, what are the celestial beings? Well, that's not hard. They're angels. There are two kinds of angels, fallen and unfallen. I talked about this before and even left you a couple of really good citations for internet research about angels, and I still recommend that. I think that'd be a smart thing for everybody to go and look at. It's not the only resources, but they're pretty concise. So you have angels who have not fallen. They have retained their position of authority, which is how Jude talks about it. And those who forsook, who turned away from their created purpose. Well, these people reject authority and they heap abuse on celestial beings, on angels. And then he goes and he kind of narrows the gap, I think, with what he says next. We're basically not dealing with the fallen angels as much as angelic creatures. And Jude cites an example. Verse 9. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not himself dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Now, this is a very interesting citation of something that we in our Christian Bible we don't have a reference to. We don't that this is the only place in, if you've got Christian Bibles that you're working from, this is the only place this thing is going to appear. Now it evidently was part of Jewish tradition that Satan and Michael the archangel fought over the body of Moses. Now, no man buried Moses. We know that. The closing chapters of the book of Exodus, he went up on the mountain and he died. He joined his ancestors in death. But no human buried his remains or laid them to rest anywhere. Now Jude says there was a conflict. There was a battle between the archangel Michael and the devil. Let's talk about those two beings. The archangel Michael. Michael evidently is the 5-star general of the angelic forces of heaven. See, angels, I have no doubt that angels are incredibly beautiful, but they are also incredibly powerful. It was kind of a failure in its execution, but in a message I preached about the Annunciation, when Gabriel spoke to Mary to announce that she was going to have Jesus as a son. Anyway, most people, when they think about angels, they think about these little pudgy, sweet-looking cherubic beings that Raphael painted. And if you type in your web browser angels Raphael or Raphael's angels, you'll get that picture, and you'll note it. I'd be very surprised if you hadn't seen that somewhere before. But I said, we got to think differently about the angelic beings. And then I posted up a picture in my PowerPoint presentation of Rambo. Because really, that's more, when you think the Archangel Michael, you do not think a sweetheart. Don't think this tender, gentle. No. I mean, this was the commander of the armies of angels. This was a powerful being. I have this belief that Michael the archangel and Lucifer the devil might have been a fist fight between the two of them, right? The mano a mano between the two of them would have, holy smokes, would have made a cage fight look like a Sunday school picnic, because these were perhaps the two most powerful of the angels. But even Michael, who could have, had he wanted to, he could have gone into hand-to-hand combat with the devil over Moses' body. But did you notice, even the archangel, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not himself dare to condemn him, Satan, for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Well, okay. Here's where one of the things I draw from this, and I often point back to this to friends and even clients. Some people are raised in a church tradition where you duke it out with the devil. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And it's in the Bible. It's there. I'm taking that as a truth. But I also think if you want to look at a biblical example of how do you do this, hand-to-hand combat with Satan, you don't. You simply, instead of saying, Satan, I'm calling you out on this. No, I don't think that's not what Jude did. Jude tells us that Michael the archangel didn't do that. What Michael the archangel says, the Lord rebuke you. I think about that and realize, okay, there's a big statement about authority in that. We're going to have to come back to that next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.